The night of the blood moon ceremony was the most sacred night in Silverstone Pack history. Once every decade, the moon goddess parted the veil between fate and flesh and revealed to each unmated wolf the one soul the universe had chosen for them, their fated mate. It was a night of white garlands and silver torches, of wolves in their finest furs and pressed linen, standing in the great courtyard of the Alpha's estate, hearts pounding with hope and hunger and holy anticipation. Oh, and then there was Isla. She arrived late. She always arrived late. Not out of carelessness, but because punctuality required confidence, and confidence required something Isla had never quite been allowed to have. She was 22 years old, and she had walked the 2 miles from the Omega Quarter alone because there was no one left to walk with her. Her mother had died 3 winters ago. Her father had abandoned them both long before that. She had no sisters, no brothers, no rank, on no name that carried weight in Silverstone. What she had was a dress, her mother's wedding garment. Ivory once, now closer to the color of old bone. The lace at the hem had frayed in 3 places, and Isla had spent 4 nights repairing it with thread she'd bought by skipping meals. The waist was too wide, taken in with careful hand-stitching along the back seam. The ribbon at the neckline had lost its stiffness years ago, so it lay soft and slightly crooked against her collarbone, no matter how many times she straightened it. She had washed her hair with lavender soap and left it loose, the way her mother used to wear it. She looked, in the unkind estimation of the wolves who watched her cross the courtyard, like poverty wearing a costume. She heard every word. Omega hearing was not so different from the rest of them. They simply learned early to pretend otherwise. She kept her chin level. She found a place at the edge of the gathering, near the stone wall where the torchlight barely reached, and she waited. She did not let herself hope. She had learned the cost of that. Alpha Commander Zane Voss arrived the way he always did, like weather, like something the world simply had to arrange itself around. He was 28, built from iron discipline and inherited fury, with dark hair pushed back from a face that seemed carved by someone who had confused beauty with severity. While he wore the Alpha Blacks, the ceremonial coat with the silver-threaded wolves at the collar, the rank insignia at his chest, and he wore them the way born leaders wear everything, as though the clothes had been waiting their whole existence for him to inhabit them. The pack parted. They always parted. He did not smile as he took his place at the center of the courtyard, beneath the blood moon, which hung low and red and enormous in the autumn sky. The High Elder raised her staff. The ritual words began. Ancient LYCAN tongue, older than the pack, older than the territory, older perhaps than memory itself. And then the moon goddess answered. Every unmated wolf in the courtyard felt it, a warmth in the chest, a tug behind the sternum, an invisible thread pulling taut. Necks turned, feet moved without permission. Eyes found eyes across the crowd with the certainty of stars finding their constellations. Zane felt it too. He had not expected to. Oh, he had told himself for years that he did not need fate's interference, that he would choose his Luna on merit and strategy, on bloodline and benefit to the pack. He had told himself the ceremony was a tradition he honored out of respect, nothing more. But the thread pulled, and it pulled him, across the courtyard, through the crowd that parted around him with wide, wondering eyes, toward the stone wall, toward the shadows, toward the girl in the borrowed dress. Isla felt it before she saw him coming. A warmth she had no name for, something older than language, deeper than instinct. It bloomed in the center of her chest like a coal catching fire, and she pressed her hand there without thinking, certain for one dizzy moment that something inside her had been waiting for exactly this. Then she looked up and saw who was walking toward her, and the warmth became terror. Alpha Commander Zane Voss stopped 3 feet in front of her. The entire pack was watching. She could feel 300 pairs of eyes like heat on her skin. She could hear. She was sure she could hear. The collective disbelief rippling through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Her. Of all the wolves in Silverstone. her. Zane looked at her. Really looked. The way the ceremony compelled, the way the bond demanded. His dark eyes moved from her face to the fraying lace at her hem to the crooked ribbon at her throat. And Isla watched something shift behind his expression. Not recognition or wonder, not the soft devastation she had heard other wolves describe when they found their fated mate. Calculation. Then something colder. Elder Marin. Alpha Voss, do you feel the bond? Do you acknowledge what the moon goddess has chosen? The silence stretched. Someone in the crowd coughed. A torch crackled. Isla stood very still. She had been still her whole life, had learned it as survival, the way prey learns stillness, and she used it now. She did not reach for him. She did not speak. She simply stood in her mother's old dress and waited for a man she had never spoken to decide what her life was worth. Zane's jaw tightened. He turned, not to her, but to the elder. Zane. I feel a pull. I don't acknowledge a bond. Elder Marin. Alpha, the moon goddess does not... Zane. The moon goddess does not run this pack. I do. He turned back to Isla then, and she saw it clearly. The decision already made before he'd crossed the courtyard. Perhaps before the ceremony, perhaps the moment she walked in late in her fraying dress from the direction of the Omega Quarter. Zane. What's your name? Her voice, when it came, was steadier than she felt. Isla. Isla Vane. Zane. Isla Vane, Omega, no bloodline, no rank. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. Zane. I am the Alpha Commander of Silverstone. My Luna will stand beside me at the war table, will command the respect of every pack in this territory, will carry the next generation of this bloodline. That requires strength, power, legacy. He looked at her dress. Just once, just for a moment. But the pack saw it, and Isla felt it like a blade between her ribs. Zane, you are not that. Whatever the moon thinks she arranged tonight, I reject it. I reject you. You are not my mate, and you will not be my Luna. This bond, if one exists, is dissolved by my authority as Alpha. You are dismissed from this ceremony. Isla did not cry. She had promised herself, when she was 9 years old and her father left without looking back, that she would not spend her tears on people who walked away from her. It was the only promise she had ever been able to keep. She looked at Zane Voss, at his certain, handsome, terrible face, for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to memorize it, long enough to let the pain in her chest become something harder, something she could carry. Then she turned around, and she walked back across the courtyard the way she had come, through the crowd that parted for her now in a different kind of silence, past the torches, through the gate, down the long road toward the Omega Quarter. Alone, in her mother's dress, into the dark. What Alpha Commander Zane Voss did not know, what no one in Silverstone knew, was that the warmth Isla had felt when the bond ignited was not the ordinary warmth of a wolf finding her mate. It was older than that. It was the warmth of something waking up, deep in the oldest, most forgotten chamber of her blood, in the lineage that her mother had never fully explained and her grandmother had only ever spoken of in whispers. Something had recognized the ceremony, recognized the moon, or recognized the pain of rejection and decided now, not yet visible, not yet loud, but present, the way fault lines are present, quiet, patient, and absolute. The supreme LYCAN bloodline had been sleeping for 3 centuries. That night it opened one eye. Episode 2. The Deadlands began where the tree line ended. There was no ceremony to mark the border, no fence, no wall, no warning carved in stone. Just the last pine tree, and then silence, and then a stretch of ash-gray earth that nothing had grown on in 300 years. The wolves of Silverstone called it the Deadlands because it was simpler than the truth. The truth was older and uglier. This was the place where the supreme LYCANs had made their last stand, where they had burned, where the ground itself had absorbed the memory of their extinction and refused, ever since, to forget. No wolf entered the Deadlands by choice. Isla entered them because she had nowhere else to go. She had been walking for 2 hours when her legs gave out. Not from exhaustion, though she was exhausted. From the rejection. From what it did to a wolf's body when the mate bond was severed by force. When the thread the moon goddess had tied between 2 souls was cut, not gently but yanked. Like a tooth pulled without warning. She fell to her knees on the gray earth and pressed her fists against her chest and breathed through it. The pain was physical, genuinely, terribly physical, a hollowness behind her sternum that expanded with every heartbeat as though something was being slowly scooped out of her. This was what rejection did. She had heard it described. She had not understood until now that the descriptions were merciful understatements. Her mother's dress tore at the knee when she fell. She noticed it distantly, the way you notice small things when the large things are too enormous to look at directly. The cold came next, a deep, marrow-level cold that had nothing to do with the autumn air. She felt it spread outward from the hollow in her chest, down her arms, into her fingers, up the back of her neck. Her vision blurred at the edges. She recognized, with the calm clarity that sometimes arrives at the end of things, that she was dying. Rejection could kill omegas. Everyone knew this and no one spoke of it. The bond, refused and severed, turned inward, devoured. A wolf without a pack, without a mate, without a bloodline, the body sometimes simply decided there was nothing left worth sustaining. Isla lay down on the gray earth of the Deadlands in her mother's torn dress and looked up at the blood moon. It looked back at her. She heard the voice before she saw the light. It did not come from around her. It came from inside her. From the hollow place in her chest, as though something had found the empty space and decided to fill it. The ancient voice. Daughter. Isla did not move, could not move, but her eyes stayed open. The ancient voice. You are lying on the grave of your ancestors. Do you know that? She didn't. She hadn't known the Deadlands were anything but dead. The ancient voice. 300 years ago, the last supreme LYCANs fell on this ground. They were not destroyed. They were buried. There is a difference. What is buried can rise. What is sleeping can wake. What was hidden? The light came then. Not from the moon, from the earth beneath her. Silver white, the color of starlight filtered through deep water. It rose through the gray ash in thin threads at first, like roots finding their way upward, and then faster, brighter, until the ground beneath Isla was luminous with it. She felt it enter her through the torn knee of her dress, and through her palms pressed against the earth, through the hollow place in her chest where the bond had been ripped away. And then she screamed. Her spine arched off the ground, every muscle in her body contracted at once. Her vision went white, completely, totally white. And in the whiteness, she saw things she had no language for. She saw herself from a great height, a small figure on gray earth, blazing like a struck match. She saw the Deadlands lit up beneath her like a map of veins. On every inch of that barren ground threaded with silver light that had been waiting, patient, contained 3 centuries of compressed power, for the precise frequency of pain that would serve as a key. Rejected, unmated, last of the blood, alone on the sacred ground. The universe had been very specific about its requirements, and Zane Voss, in his pride, had met every one of them. When Isla opened her eyes, the moon was in a different position in the sky. Hours had passed. She sat up. The hollow place in her chest was gone. In its place was something she did not yet have a name for, a density, a weight, a warmth that did not flicker the way ordinary warmth flickered. It was steady. It was vast. It felt the way she imagined bedrock felt. Unmovable. Unconditional. Old. She looked at her hands. They looked the same. She pressed one palm flat against the gray earth, and the ground lit up. A pulse of silver, moving outward from her hand in a perfect circle, saw 20 feet in every direction. Where the light touched, Green things pushed through the ash. Not slowly, immediately, as though they had been there all along, simply waiting for permission. Isla stared at the tiny green shoots surrounding her. She had read about the supreme lichens once, in a book she'd found discarded in the pack library, a history text so old the spine had crumbled in her hands. She had read that the supreme lichens were not merely a stronger breed of wolf. They were something the moon goddess had made first, before the hierarchy of alpha and beta and omega had been established. Something that predated rank, something that all wolfkind had originally descended from and had forgotten and had eventually decided must not have existed. She had not, at the time, thought to wonder why her mother kept lavender in every room of their house and whispered to the moon on clear nights. She wondered now. The ancient voice. "You will not die here, daughter. You were never going to die here. The rejection was not your ending. It was your beginning. Pain was the only door this bloodline would open from." Isla. What am I? The answer came not as words, but as a feeling, as knowing, the way you know your own name without being taught. She was the last. She was the first. She was the thing that every supernatural faction in the known world had been told was extinct and had built their power structures upon that assumption, and was about to discover they were catastrophically wrong. Isla stood on the ground where her ancestors had fallen and looked back toward the lights of Silverstone, distant and golden through the trees. She felt the pack bond, the collective thread that connected every wolf in Silverstone to the alpha, to each other. She had felt it her whole life as a thin, peripheral thing, barely her entitlement as an omega. She felt it now the way you feel a single candle flame when you are standing in the sun. Small, warm, completely beside the point. She did not feel rage. That surprised her. She thought she would feel rage. Instead, she felt something quieter and more dangerous. The absolute, settled certainty of someone who has just discovered that the person who dismissed them had no idea what they were dismissing. She did not go back to Silverstone that night. She turned and walked deeper into the Deadlands, and with every step, the gray earth bloomed silver beneath her feet. She had a great deal to learn. She had already decided she would not waste a single day. Behind her, in a wide silver circle on ground that had refused to grow anything for 300 years, white flowers opened their faces to the blood moon and bloomed. The girl who should have died had not died. She had become something the world had no category for yet. It would learn. Episode 3. 5 years is not a long time in the life of a wolf. It is, however, more than enough time to build an empire if you are the right kind of woman, with the right kind of pain, and you have decided, with the absolute quiet conviction of someone who has already survived the worst thing, that you will never be small again. This is the story of 5 years, told in the only way it deserves to be told, not as suffering, but as architecture, not as survival, but as construction, brick by careful brick, alliance by alliance, until the girl who had walked out of Silverstone in a torn dress had become something the supernatural world had not seen in 3 centuries and did not yet have the vocabulary to describe. This is how Empress Isla was built. The Obsidian Court convened once a month in the neutral territory between the northern wolf clans and the eastern vampire covens. A vast, windowless hall carved directly into the mountainside, lit entirely by enchanted stone that glowed the cold blue-white of deep winter. 43 supernatural faction leaders attended. Alphas, coven masters, rogue commanders, the witch council's 3 eldest sisters, a dragonkin elder who had not left his mountain in 60 years and had come anyway, which told you everything you needed to know about who was running this meeting. They were all already seated when Isla arrived. She wore black. She almost always wore black now, not as affectation, but because it was practical, and because the silver that moved beneath her skin when her power stirred showed more clearly against dark fabric. Her hair was up. Her expression was the one she had spent years perfecting. Not cold, Not hard, but absolutely unshakably settled. The expression of someone who has made every decision they are ever going to make about their own worth and filed it away and moved on. She took her seat at the head of the obsidian table. No one had assigned her that seat. No one had needed to. The first time she had entered this hall, 18 months after leaving Silverstone, she had simply sat there, and every other leader in the room had rearranged themselves accordingly, the way iron filings arrange themselves around a magnet, instinctively, before they even understand why. Coven Master Dravain. The border dispute in the eastern reaches. The Thornback rogues are pushing past the agreed line again. 3 of my covens have reported incursions this week alone. Alpha Sauron of the Iron Fang Pack. Your covens built their settlements on traditional wolf territory. The line was never agreed. It was imposed. Dravain. It was ratified by every faction present at the... Ela. Enough. One word. Quiet. Not loud. She had learned early that volume was the instrument of people who were not sure they would be listened to. The hall went still. Ela. Dravain. The eastern line holds. Your covens knew the boundary when they built. Sauron. The Thornbacks answer to you. Leash them or I will, and you won't enjoy watching me do it. The next incursion will be treated as a declaration of aggression against this court, and we will respond accordingly. Are we clear? A pause. Then, Alpha Sauron. Clear, Empress. Dravain. Clear. Isla moved on. She always moved on. There was too much to do to linger over victories. Her second in command was a woman named Rin, a rogue wolf with a scar that ran from her left ear to her jaw and the fastest tactical mind Isla had ever encountered. Rin had found Isla in the Deadlands 14 months after the rejection, drawn by rumors that something impossible was living in the ash fields and making them bloom. She had taken one look at Isla and immediately sat down in the dirt and said, very simply, Rin, memory, spoken plainly, whatever you're building, I want in. I'm good at breaking things that need breaking and fixing things that need fixing. I don't require much sleep, and I have no loyalties that would complicate yours. I'll serve you until you don't need serving, and then I'll find something else to do. Isla had looked at her for a long moment. Isla, memory. What do you want in return? Rin, memory. A purpose, and occasionally, very good food. Isla had hired her on the spot. It remained one of the best decisions she had ever made. And now Rin fell into step beside her as she left the obsidian court and handed her a folded report without preamble, the way she always did. No ceremony, just information, delivered clean. Rin. Silverstone's northern perimeter. The shadow unit flagged it again. The Vorkai scouts are getting closer. 3 incursions this month, all repelled before they reached Silverstone's border. Zane's trackers caught the trail of one but lost it before the river. They don't know how close it came. Isla took the report. Read it in 3 seconds. Folded it. Isla. Pull the shadow unit back to the ridgeline. Maintain the perimeter but don't engage unless the Vorkai get within half a mile of Silverstone's outer wolves. Rin. Understood. And the unit's cover story if Silverstone's scouts spot them? Isla. They won't. Rin. Isla. Isla. They won't, Rin. My people don't get spotted. A pause. Rin. You could just tell him, you know. Send a message. We'll let him know his pack has been sitting inside a protective perimeter for 3 years because his fated mate decided to... Isla. Next item. Rin looked at her for one long moment with the expression she reserved for arguments she had already lost and knew better than to keep having. Rin. The Witch Council has formally requested your attendance at the Solstice Conclave. The Dragonkin Elder wants a private meeting before year's end. And there are 17 alliance proposals in your correspondence from packs who want Obsidian Court membership. Isla. Accept the conclave. Schedule the Elder for next month. And tell the 17 packs that court membership requires a probationary year and a demonstration of good faith. Same as everyone else. No exceptions for name or bloodline. Rin. Noted. One more thing. Something in her tone made Isla look up from the corridor ahead. Rin, One of the Vorkai scouts we turned back last week. Before my unit intercepted him, he got close enough to Silverstone's border to leave a mark. A dark one. A targeting rune. Old magic. Isla stopped walking. Isla. How old? Rin. Old enough that I had to ask the Witch Council's eldest to identify it. She went quiet for about 10 minutes, and then she said, and these are her exact words, that rune has not been used since the Purge. Whoever placed it is not scouting. They are preparing. Silence in the corridor. The enchanted stone glowed cold and blue around them. Isla. Preparing for what? Rin. She wouldn't say, but she looked afraid. And Isla, that woman has lived 400 years. I have never seen her afraid of anything. Isla stood in the blue-lit corridor of her mountain court and thought about a pack she had not set foot in for 5 years. A pack that did not know her shadow agents patrolled their borders in rotating shifts. A pack that had no idea that 3 separate assassination attempts on their alpha had been quietly, efficiently neutralized before they ever became threats he was aware of. A pack led by a man who had looked at a girl in a torn dress and seen nothing worth keeping. She had asked herself in the early days why she kept doing it, why she kept protecting them. She had given herself many clean, logical answers: strategic value, territorial stability, and the court's interest in preventing pack collapses in the northern region. All of it true, none of it the whole truth. The whole truth was simpler and more inconvenient. She still felt the ghost of the bond. Not the bond itself, that had been severed, and the supreme LYCAN blood had long since replaced whatever the moon goddess had originally threaded between them with something far older and stranger. But the ghost of it remained. A directional awareness, like knowing which way was north. She always knew, without trying, approximately where Zane was, whether he was well, whether he was in danger. She had never once acted on it. She had simply, quietly, made sure that he remained alive and his pack remained safe, from a distance, for 5 years, without his knowledge or his gratitude or his awareness that the Omega he had dismissed without a second thought had become the only thing standing between him and forces he didn't even know were gathering. She turned back to Rin. Isla, double the shadow unit. I want eyes on every approach to Silverstone's territory, day and night, and get me everything the Witch Council has on the Vorkai, their leadership, their objectives, their timeline. Rin, you think this is escalating? Isla, I think the targeting rune means they're done scouting, which means whatever comes next. She paused. Something moved behind her eyes, not fear, but the recognition of a threshold being crossed. Isla, I won't be able to stop it from the shadows much longer. The Supreme LYCAN Empress returned to her chambers, dismissed her attendants, and stood at the narrow window that looked north, always north, toward a territory she had not entered since she was 22 years old and wearing borrowed lace. 5 years of building, 5 years of power accumulated like sediment, layer by patient layer, until the weight of it was tectonic. 5 years of protecting a man who did not know her name anymore, who had probably by now stopped thinking of her at all. She pressed 2 fingers to the center of her chest, where the bond ghost lived its quiet, directional life. He was well. She could feel it. Alive and certain and completely unaware of the storm that was, at last, gathering speed on his horizon. She let her hand fall. She had built an empire in silence. The silence, it seemed, was ending. Episode 4. There is a particular kind of dread that comes not from surprise, but from recognition. From seeing something you have been quietly dreading for years finally step out of the shadows and announce itself. Isla had known, in the way that people who carry great power always know, that the peace she had maintained around Silverstone's borders was borrowed time. She had bought it carefully, month by month, neutralizing threats before they became visible. Steering danger away from a pack that had no idea it needed steering. She had been good at it, exceptional even, but there are forces in the world that cannot be quietly redirected. The Vorkai were one of them. Isla was already awake when Rin entered. She had not slept well in 3 days, a restlessness she recognized as instinct, as the supreme LYCAN blood in her responding to something building in the atmosphere the way animals grow still before a storm. Rin's face told her everything before a word was spoken. Rin, the shadow unit at Silverstone's northern ridge, they're gone, Isla. A beat of absolute silence. Isla, gone as in pulled back or gone as in... Rin, gone, all 7 of them. We found the campsite an hour ago. No signs of struggle, no tracks leading out, just gone, as though they had simply ceased to exist where they stood. Isla was on her feet before Rin finished the sentence. I moving to the war table. A great slab of dark stone engraved with the territorial maps of every supernatural region within 500 miles. She pressed both palms flat against it, and the silver beneath her skin responded, lighting the engraved lines like circuitry coming alive. Isla, show me the last position report. Rin, 3 hours ago. Everything normal. The Vorkai scouts they'd been tracking had retreated to beyond the river. Kyle, the unit lead, had reported the perimeter was clean and quiet, then nothing. No distress signal, no final transmission, just silence. Isla stared at the map. Her 7 agents, wolves she had trained herself, people she trusted with the work that required absolute discretion, erased in the space of 3 hours from a position they had held without incident for over a year. The Vorkai had not retreated beyond the river. They had wanted her unit to think they had. Isla, how many Vorkai are we talking about? Truly, not the scouting numbers, the real numbers. Rin hesitated. That alone made Isla's blood cool. Rin, the Witch Council's intelligence suggests between 400 and 600, possibly more. They've been consolidating rogue factions for 18 months. Every wolf the established packs rejected. Every creature the court's members discarded. They've been building an army in the blind spots, and their commander, Isla. Malachar. Rin. You know him. Isla. I know of him. Ancient. I pre-purge, like the rune. He was imprisoned by the Supreme LYCANs 300 years ago for attempting to raise a dark tide, a ritual that would unmake the supernatural hierarchy entirely, tear it down to nothing and rebuild it under his dominion. Rin. They imprisoned him, not killed him. Isla. The Supreme LYCANs believed in proportional response. They sealed him in a warded tomb in the northern reaches and assumed the wards would hold indefinitely. A pause. Both women looked at each other across the war table. Rin. The Supreme LYCANs have been extinct for 300 years. Isla. Yes, and he has apparently spent those 300 years waiting for someone to stop maintaining the wards. Isla closed her eyes for 3 seconds. When she opened them, something had shifted in her expression. The settled authority was still there, but beneath it now was something fiercer, older. The supreme LYCAN blood recognizing the name of its ancient enemy, the way a sword recognizes the particular weight of the hands it was forged for. Isla. What does he want with Silverstone specifically? Rin. The Witch Council believes Silverstone sits on a convergence point, a place where the ley lines that power the supernatural world intersect. If Malachar's ritual is what they think it is, he needs that convergence point as an anchor. He needs to break a pack on that ground. It's destroy it completely. Alpha, wolves, the territory bond, to crack the convergence open. Isla. And if the convergence is cracked, Rin. Every supernatural ward, boundary, and protective seal in the northern hemisphere fails simultaneously. Every protected territory, every warded settlement, every safety the factions have built over centuries, gone, all at once. The weight of it settled over the room like something physical. Thousands of wolves, hundreds of covens, witch settlements, rogue sanctuaries, dragonkin territories, all of it exposed, unprotected, in a single catastrophic moment. And Malachar at the center of it, with 600 dark-trained soldiers and 3 centuries of patient fury. Isla. When? Rin. The next blood moon? 11 days. 11 days. Isla stood at her war table and understood, with crystalline clarity, that the mathematics of this situation left her exactly one option. She could not stop 600 Vorkai soldiers from the ridgeline. She could not protect Silverstone's convergence point with shadow agents. Her shadow agents were already gone. She could not redirect this threat the way she had redirected every other threat for 5 years, quietly and invisibly and from a careful distance. She had to go herself. She had to walk back into Silverstone. And Zane Voss, Alpha Commander Zane Voss, who had stood beneath a blood moon and told her she was nothing worth keeping, was going to have to look at what she had become. She became aware, distantly, that her hands on the war table were trembling. Not from fear. From the effort of containing something that did not want to be contained, 5 years of power, 5 years of becoming, and beneath all of it the ghost of a bond pressing against the inside of her chest like something that had been waiting for exactly this permission. She stilled her hands. Deliberately. Completely. Rin. Isla, are you... Isla. Send word to every Obsidian Court faction. Full mobilization. I want the Iron Fang pack at Silverstone's western border in 7 days, the Witch Council's war coven at the northern ridge in 5, and Dravain's fastest fighters at the eastern approach within the week. Nobody moves without my signal. Rin. And Silverstone itself? Zane? A pause that lasted exactly 1 heartbeat longer than it needed to. It's Isla. I'll handle Silverstone. Rin. You mean you'll handle him? Isla. I mean I'll handle Silverstone. Rin watched her for a moment with those sharp, loyal, too perceptive eyes. Rin, do you want me to come with you? Isla. No, I need you coordinating the mobilization. This part... She paused. She picked up the folded intelligence report from the table, the one with the targeting rune sketch, the 7 missing names, the 11-day countdown, and held it for a moment like something she was deciding whether to set down or carry. Isla. This part I have to do alone. She stood there for a long time after Rin left. She thought about what it would feel like to cross that border, to walk into the territory that had expelled her, to stand in front of a pack that had watched her humiliated in the torchlight and done nothing, said nothing, and then gone home and never thought about her again. She thought about Zane's face, the calculation in it, the cold efficiency of his dismissal. She had memorized it that night, and she had used it well, had used it every time she needed to remember that softness was a luxury she could not afford, that the world would not give her what she deserved simply because she deserved it, that she had to build every inch of her standing from the ground up, with her own hands, from the gray ash of the place where her ancestors had burned. She had used his rejection like a sharpening stone for 5 years, and now she was going to have to walk back into his home, his territory, his authority, and ask him to trust her. Or more accurately, she was going to walk in, and he was going to have to trust her whether he chose to or not, because the alternative was the destruction of everything he had ever protected. She pressed her fingers once more to the center of her chest. He was awake. She could feel it, that directional warmth, restless, the way it always was in the hours before dawn when his pack instincts drove him to the edges of his territory. Walking the border, probably, the way he always did. He had no idea what was coming for him. He had no idea she was already on her way. The Supreme LYCAN Empress called for her horse, her traveling coat, and her second-best sword. She left her best one at the court because she intended to come back, and she had learned long ago that you pack for the life you plan to return to. She rode north as the sun came up, toward Silverstone, toward the reckoning she had been quietly, patiently, meticulously postponing for 5 years. The silence was over. Episode 5. The wolves of Silverstone felt her before they saw her. That was the first thing. That was how they would all describe it afterward, in hushed conversations over cold cups of tea, with the slightly dazed expressions of people trying to explain something that language was not quite wide enough to hold. They felt her. A pressure in the chest, gentle but absolute, like the moment before a thunderclap when the air itself seems to hold its breath and every living thing goes still without knowing why. The border wolves felt it first. 2 sentinels on the northern ridge, seasoned fighters, 10 years of pack service between them, men who had faced rogue incursions and territorial disputes and the particular cold violence of winter patrols without flinching once. They felt the pressure, looked north, and went to their knees. Not commanded, or not compelled by any force they could name. Simply, their legs decided in some old, pre-rational part of themselves that answered to something older than alpha law, that standing was no longer the appropriate posture. One of them managed to reach his comm stone before his hands started shaking. 3 words. That was all he sent. She is here. Zane was in his war room when the message arrived. He had been there since before dawn. The targeting rune report had reached him 2 days ago through channels he didn't fully understand, and he had spent 48 hours in the grip of a dread he couldn't entirely explain. Something was coming. He had felt it in his bones, in the pack bond, in the restless way his wolves had been patrolling the borders without being asked, driven by instinct toward the perimeter as though something in their blood was trying to build a wall with their bodies. He read the 3 words on the commstone. She is here. He did not know who she was. He looked up at his beta, who shook his head, equally lost. Zane grabbed his coat and moved. By the time Zane reached the courtyard, half his pack was already there. They had come from the training yards and the kitchens and the barracks and the healer's hall. They had come without being summoned, drawn by the same pressure the border wolves had felt. That deep, a pre-rational pull that bypassed the thinking mind entirely and spoke directly to whatever part of a wolf remembered being something more ancient than rank and territory and the politics of survival. They were standing very still, facing the gate. And then the gate opened. She walked in alone. No retinue, no banners, no ceremonial guard or advance announcement. Just a woman in a traveling coat the color of midnight. With her dark hair pinned at the nape of her neck and a sword at her hip, she wore the way people wear things they have genuinely used. She walked through the gate of Silverstone Pack like she had done it 10,000 times. Like the stone beneath her feet recognized her and was glad. The courtyard held perhaps 200 wolves. Every single one of them went to their knees, not one by one. Together. A sound like a single exhalation. Cloth on stone. 200 bodies lowering at once, as the supreme LYCAN blood in the air hit the pack bond like a tuning fork struck against the oldest instinct they carried, and their bodies answered before their minds could form a question. Zane did not kneel. Not because he refused, because his legs had stopped receiving instructions. He stood at the edge of the courtyard steps and stared. Whitten felt something happen in his chest that he had absolutely no category for. A recognition so violent it was almost pain. A yanking sensation behind his sternum, as though something that had been torn away 5 years ago was suddenly, searingly present again and demanding his attention. He looked at her face, and the world stopped being the size it had been. She looked different. That was the first thought. Inadequate, useless, but unavoidable. She looked different in a way that went beyond 5 years of growing into herself, beyond the authority in her posture and the calm in her face and the sword she wore like punctuation. She looked different the way the sky looks different in the moment before dawn, not yet what it will become, but already unmistakably no longer what it was. Something fundamental had shifted in her. Something ancient had moved into the space behind her eyes and made itself at home. And yet he knew her. He knew her the way you know a song you heard once when you were very young and have not thought of in years, not consciously, not with your thinking mind, but somewhere deeper. Somewhere that memory lives before it becomes memory. The torn lace dress, the courtyard torchlight, the girl who had looked at him for exactly 3 seconds before she turned and walked into the dark. Isla. The name arrived in his chest before it reached his mouth. No, and it arrived with something attached to it, something that felt alarmingly like grief. She crossed the courtyard slowly. Deliberate. She let him look, let the pack look, because she had learned that visibility was its own kind of power, and she had spent 5 years invisible, and she was done with that now. She stopped 10 feet from where he stood. Up close, he was the same and entirely different. The same jaw, the same dark eyes, the same quality of presence that had always made the air around him feel slightly more weighted than air elsewhere. But there were lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there before, and something in his expression that she didn't remember. A tightness around the mouth, the particular look of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time without telling anyone. She felt the ghost of the Bond flare. Warm, insistent, odd, inconvenient as always. And she set it aside with the practiced ease of someone who has had 5 years of practice. She was here for Silverstone, for the convergence point, for the 11 days and the 600 Vorkai soldiers and the ancient darkness gathering in the north. She was not here for him. She told herself this clearly, once, and then she opened her mouth. Isla. Alpha Voss. Her voice was steady, low, carrying across the silent courtyard without effort. Just the way the voices of supreme LYCANs carried, not through volume but through a quality of absolute presence, as though the air itself leaned in to conduct the sound. She watched him flinch at it, just slightly, just once, as though the sound of her voice, after 5 years, was something that required physical adjustment. Zane. You. Not eloquent. Not the response of a man who had spent years composing what he would say if this moment ever came. Just you. Raw and undone and completely unguarded, in a way she had never seen him be unguarded before. She almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Isla. I am Isla Vane, Empress of the Obsidian Court, Commander of the Supreme LYCAN bloodline. I speak for every supernatural faction in the Northern Hemisphere, and I am here because your pack is 11 days from annihilation and you have no idea. The courtyard was so quiet she could hear individual wolves breathing. Isla. Your territory sits on the Ardenmoor Convergence, the most powerful supernatural anchor point in this hemisphere. An ancient enemy named Malakar has been building an army for 18 months with the specific intention of destroying this pack on this ground on the night of the blood moon. If he succeeds, every ward, boundary, and protective seal in the Northern Hemisphere fails at once. Thousands die. Everything your pack has built and everything every other faction has built collapses in a single night. She paused. Let it land. Isla. I have court forces mobilizing at your borders as we speak. I have intelligence on Malakar's numbers, his timeline, and his method. I can stop this, but I need access to your territory, your pack's cooperation, and your trust. The last word landed differently from the others. Quieter. More weight per syllable. Trust, from her, directed at him. She watched him process it, watched the Alpha Commander's mind working, the strategic assessment running behind his eyes, the calculation she remembered so well from the ceremony. But this time there was something else running alongside it, something that wasn't calculation at all. Zane, you've been watching my pack. Not a question. His voice was low, careful, like a man walking across ice, testing each step. Isla, yes. Zane, for how long? Isla, 3 years. A sound moved through the kneeling pack, not quite a gasp, not quite words, a collective inhale. Zane. Why? One word. But the way he said it, the way it came out rough-edged and unfinished, as though the real question was longer and he didn't yet have the right to ask it, made something tighten in Isla's throat that she chose not to examine. She held his gaze. See, she did not look away and she did not soften and she did not give him the answer that was true. Not yet. Not here, in the courtyard, with 200 wolves listening and 11 days on the clock, and a world that needed saving before anyone got to deal with the smaller, more devastating business of 2 people and a bond that had been broken and was inconveniently, undeniably, still present somewhere underneath everything. Isla. Because someone had to. And I was in the best position to do it. It was true. It was just not all of the truth. He looked at her for a long moment. She did not look away. She had not come this far and become what she was to look away from Zane Voss. Then something shifted in his face. The calculation receded. The tightness around his mouth eased. Not much, not completely, but enough. Enough that she saw for just a moment, beneath the Alpha Commander and the pride and the 5 years of not knowing what he had done. Something that looked startlingly close to a man standing in the wreckage of a decision he had made quickly and lived with slowly. He descended the steps. He stopped in front of her, close, closer than the distance she had maintained, close enough that she could see the detail of his eyes and feel the warmth of him and feel the bond ghost blaze up between them like a coal-fed oxygen. He said nothing for a moment. Then he did something she had not expected. Not in any version of this she had imagined over 5 years. He stepped aside, turned to his pack, and said in the full voice of an alpha addressing his wolves, "Zane. The Empress of the Obsidian Court is a guest of Silverstone Pack. She has full access to our territory, our resources, and our cooperation. Any request she makes is to be treated as a direct order from this alpha. Are we clear?" 200 wolves, still kneeling, answered as one. Silverstone Pack, together. "Yes, you alpha." He turned back to her. Up close, his jaw was tight and his eyes were very dark, and he looked like a man with a great deal to say, and no idea yet how to say any of it. "Zane, I'll have quarters prepared, whatever you need." She looked at him, at this man who had unmade her once and had no idea she had rebuilt herself into something that made mountains bow, and she felt the ghost of the bond press warm and insistent against the inside of her ribs, and she thought, not yet. Not now. There is a war to stop first. Isla. War room. Now, I'll need your senior commanders and every map you have of the northern approach. She walked past him toward the hall. The kneeling pack parted around her like water. Zane Voss stood alone in the center of his courtyard for exactly 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, something moved across his face that his wolves had never seen there before, that no one had ever seen there. The expression of a man who has only just understood the size of what he lost. Then he turned and followed her inside. Episode 6. The war room of Silverstone Pack had seen many difficult nights. It had seen battle planning and border crises, and the long, grinding conversations that happen when a pack loses wolves and has to decide how to carry the weight of that forward. The maps on the walls bore the marks of those nights. Ink corrections layered over ink corrections, the territorial lines redrawn and redrawn, the record of a pack that had survived by being willing to look clearly at hard things. It had never seen a night quite like this one. Isla worked for 4 hours without stopping. She spread her intelligence reports across the central table, overlaid them with Silverstone's territorial maps, and walked Zane's commanders through everything, Malakar's numbers, his approach vectors, the convergence point's location and vulnerability, the court forces already mobilizing at the borders. She was precise and thorough and completely without performance. She answered questions directly. She corrected 2 of the commander's tactical assumptions without condescension, simply redirecting, here, not there, this timing, not that one. Zane's commanders, to their credit, adapted quickly. Within an hour, they had stopped looking at her with the wary uncertainty of wolves processing an impossible situation and started looking at her the way experienced soldiers look at a commander they have decided to trust, with focus and relief and the particular gratitude of people who have been carrying a problem they didn't know how to solve and have just been handed someone who does. Zane said almost nothing. He stood at the edge of the table and watched her and said almost nothing for 4 hours, and the almost nothing was the loudest thing in the room. His commanders filed out after midnight. The door closed. The fire settled into its lower register, the comfortable and confessional crackle of a flame that has stopped performing and is simply burning. Isla began rolling the maps, methodical, efficient, not looking at him. She had been not looking at him with great precision and considerable effort for 4 hours. He spoke first. "Zane, You stopped 3 attacks on my pack that I never knew about. Not a question. He had clearly been reviewing the intelligence files she'd shared with his beta before the briefing, working backward through the evidence. T counting. Isla. 4. There were 4. A beat of silence. Zane. 4 attacks, in 3 years, on my pack, and I had no idea any of them were coming. Isla. Your border security is good. It would have caught 2 of them eventually. The other 2, Zane, would have killed us. She did not confirm or deny. She kept rolling the map in her hands. The fire crackled. Zane. Why didn't you tell me? Any of it? Why didn't you send word, a message, an anonymous tip, anything? Why did you handle it yourself, in secret, for 3 years, without ever letting me know you existed? She set the rolled map down. She turned and faced him across the table because she was done not looking at him, and they both knew it. Isla. Because you made it very clear in front of your entire pack that I was not someone whose existence concerned you. I respected that. I built my own life. I was not going to come crawling back to the territory that expelled me with information that would have required you to acknowledge me as something worth acknowledging. The words were clean, measured, true in every syllable. And underneath them, if you listened for it, if you knew where to listen, something that was not clean or measured at all. Something that had been living in the space between what she said and what she meant for 5 years, us getting quieter and more dangerous with every year of silence. He heard it. She could tell by the way his jaw tightened, by the way he looked at his own hands briefly and then back at her. Zane. I was wrong. 3 words, flat and unadorned, with no softening preamble, no qualifications attached. The way a man says something when he has been rehearsing it privately for long enough that the rehearsal has burned all the ornamentation away and left only the bare structure of the thing. She looked at him. Zane. At the ceremony. What I said, what I did, I was wrong. I looked at you and I made a calculation and I was wrong. Not just tactically wrong, not just wrong about what you were or what you would become. Wrong in a way that doesn't have a clean word for it. A wrong that I have been living with in a way I didn't understand until tonight. She said nothing. She was very good, by now, at saying nothing. Zane. I told myself it was leadership, strategy. That a Luna had to be chosen for the strength of the pack, not the instruction of the moon. I told myself that for a long time. I was good at telling myself things. He moved around the table. Not toward her. Not yet. Just no longer keeping the table between them. He stopped a few feet away and the fire threw his face into warm relief, and she could see very clearly the thing she had seen in the courtyard. The man beneath the Alpha Commander. The one who had been carrying this. Zane. And then tonight you walked through my gate and my entire pack went to their knees and the bond... He stopped. His hand went briefly to his chest, an involuntary gesture. The same gesture she made alone at her northern window when she pressed her fingers to the ghost of it. Zane. The bond isn't gone. I told myself it had dissolved the way I declared, but it isn't gone. It's been there this entire time, hasn't it? She looked at him for a long moment. The firelight. The maps. The 5 years between them like a country they had both crossed by different roads and arrived at the same border of. Isla. What remains is a ghost of it. The rejection damaged it. The supreme LYCAN blood changed what I am at a fundamental level. The bond between us, if it exists now, would be different from what it was. It cannot simply be restored by wanting it restored. Zane. That's not what I asked. A pause. Her jaw. A breath. Isla. No, it isn't gone. The words cost her something. She could feel the price of them. The specific vulnerability of admitting to a man who had once dismissed her completely that the thread between them had outlasted his dismissal. That it had survived the Deadlands and the Awakening and 5 years of empire building and was still, stubbornly, impossibly, present. She had spent a long time being strong. Strength, she had learned, I was not the absence of tenderness. It was the decision about where to put it and when. She had been very careful with that decision, very selective, but he had said, I was wrong, without qualification, without excuse. And she knew in the part of her that had been paying attention to him for 5 years from a careful distance, how much that had cost him too. Zane, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know before I ask it that I understand you don't owe me an answer. I understand that I have no ground to stand on with you. I understand that what I did was… Isla. Ask the question, Zane. His name, first name, no title, the first time she had used it. She heard the small sound he made at it, barely audible, as though the sound of his name in her mouth was something that required physical adjustment. Zane, did you protect my pack because of the bond, or because it was the right thing to do? She looked at him steadily. Isla. Both. From the beginning, both. The bond made me aware of the danger. My own conscience made me act on that awareness. I won't pretend one without the other. I'm done performing versions of myself that leave inconvenient parts out. Zane. And the rest of it. The watching. The knowing where I was, whether I was… He stopped. Something crossed his face, rawer than she had expected. Zane. Did you know when I was struggling? Was there ever a time in 5 years when things were difficult here and you knew and you… Isla. Yes. The word landed quietly between them. Isla. There were 3 nights in the 2nd year. You lost 2 wolves to a rogue attack near the Eastern Creek. I felt it through the directional awareness, the spike of pack grief. I spent those 3 nights wanting to cross the border. Zane. But you didn't. Isla. No, I kept my shadow unit close to yours that week. I made sure the eastern approach was clean. And then I went back to my court and built another wall around the part of me that wanted things it had been denied. He was very close now. She wasn't sure when that had happened. Or rather, she was sure, precisely, because she always knew where he was. But she had chosen not to track it consciously, and now here they were. 3 feet. The firelight between them warm and unreasonable. Zane. I want to fix this. I know I can't. I know there is no fixing what was done, but I want… Isla. Zane. Zane. I want to be worthy of you. I don't know yet how to do that, but I want to learn. If you'll allow it, if you're willing to let me… Isla. There is a war first. He stopped. Isla. Malachar in 10 days, 600 Vorkai soldiers, the convergence point and the fate of every supernatural faction in the hemisphere. There is a war first. After the war… She paused. Something shifted in her face. The controlled authority softening at the edges, just slightly, just enough, the same way the sky softens in the hour before dawn when it is deciding, finally, to let the light in. Isla. After the war, we will talk. Properly. With time and space enough to say everything that needs saying. I'm not going anywhere, Zane. I haven't been going anywhere for 5 years. I think you've earned the right to know that much. He looked at her. The fire. The maps. The 5 years. And then, slowly, with the careful deliberateness of a man who has learned in the last few hours that rushing things is how he loses them, he reached out and laid his hand over hers where it rested on the table. Not grasping, not demanding, just there, warm, present, and asking, not a taking. She looked down at his hand on hers. She felt the bond ghost blaze up like a lit torch, and for once, for the first time in 5 years, she did not set it aside. She let it be there. Let it burn. Let herself feel the full warmth of it without managing it, or containing it, or filing it carefully away for later. Just for a moment. Just long enough for it to mean something. Then she turned her hand over. Slowly. And let her fingers close around his. They stood like that for a long moment, not speaking, because they had said the necessary things and the rest could wait. And some things are communicated more accurately through the quiet pressure of a hand than through any arrangement of words. Then Isla straightened, released his hand. picked up the last rolled map from the table. Isla, get some sleep. Tomorrow we begin coordinating the court forces with your pack's defense positions. We have 10 days and every one of them counts. Zane. And you? Will you sleep? She looked at him over her shoulder as she moved toward the door. And something moved in her face. Something small and unguarded and warm, there and gone in a breath, like a star glimpsed through cloud cover. Isla. I haven't slept well in 5 years. I'm hoping that might change. She left him there, in the war room, with the dying fire and the maps and the particular charged silence of a room where something important has just shifted on its axis. He stood very still for a long moment after the door closed. Then Alpha Commander Zane Voss, who had stood beneath a blood moon and chosen pride over fate and had spent 5 years living in the quiet wreckage of that choice, put both hands flat on the war table, dropped his head, and breathed. Not grief, exactly. Not relief, exactly. The specific feeling of a man who has been given, against all reasonable expectation, a second chance he knows he has not earned, and is absolutely, completely, terrifyingly determined not to waste it. Episode 7. The blood moon rose on the 10th night. It climbed the sky the way it always did, slow, enormous, the color of something that had been burning for a very long time. But this blood moon was different from everyone that had come before it. Every supernatural creature within 500 miles felt it. A heaviness, a held breath, the particular atmospheric weight of a night that history has already decided will be remembered. The Vorkai came at midnight. Used 612 of them, as it turned out. Rin's final count, delivered to Isla 3 hours before, with the clipped precision of someone who has made their peace with large numbers and is focused entirely on what comes next. They came from the north, as expected. They came in formation, dark, disciplined, the kind of organized that only happens when an ancient intelligence is directing it. Malachar himself moved at their center, visible even from distance. A figure that seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. 3 centuries of imprisoned fury and patient planning finally unleashed. He had not expected what was waiting for him. Isla stood on the Ardenmoor Ridge with Zane at her left shoulder and let her court forces do what 10 days of precision planning had prepared them to do. The Iron Fang pack held the western flank, 300 wolves under Alpha Soren, who had decided over the course of 10 days that the Empress was the most terrifying and impressive creature he had ever had the privilege of taking orders from. The Witch Council's war coven had sealed the northern approach with ward lines that burned silver in the dark, channeling the Vorkai advance exactly where Isla wanted it. Dravain's fighters closed the eastern corridor. Rin commanded the reserve force from the southern position, ready to move the moment Isla gave the signal. The Vorkai hit the ward lines and faltered. 600 soldiers expecting an undefended pack, finding instead a coordinated supernatural military response that had been constructed with the kind of methodical care that only comes from someone who has been planning for this exact enemy for a very long time. Malachar stopped advancing. He looked up at the ridge. He looked at Isla. Malachar. Supreme LYCAN. I thought your bloodline extinct. His voice carried the distance between them without effort. Ancient vocal cords, the resonance of something that had been speaking for 3 centuries before most of the wolves on this battlefield were born. Isla. That was the intention. It didn't take. Malachar. You cannot stop what has already begun. The ritual requires only the destruction of this pack on this ground. I have 600 soldiers. You have... Isla. Enough. She raised her right hand. The silver came, not slowly, not gradually, but all at once, the way it always came when she stopped managing it and simply let it be what it was. It rose from her skin like light from a source that had always been there, blazing white silver in the blood moon dark, climbing her arm and spreading across her shoulders and lifting her hair with the static charge of it. And below on the battlefield, every wolf on both sides stopped moving for one involuntary second because the visual cortex, And regardless of training, regardless of allegiance, registers certain things as simply, undeniably beyond the ordinary. And this was one of them. The supreme LYCAN power, uncontained, unmanaged, unleashed. It was, by any honest account, extraordinary. The convergence point responded to her. That was what Malachar had miscalculated. He had assumed the convergence point was simply a location, a fixed anchor of supernatural power, neutral and available to whoever reached it first. He had not accounted for the possibility that the convergence point might recognize someone, that 3 centuries of supreme LYCAN blood soaked into the earth of the Deadlands might have created a relationship between the last of that bloodline and the ground itself. The ley lines that crossed beneath Silverstone lit up like a map drawn in starlight. Every ward, every boundary, every protective seal in the northern hemisphere pulsed once, bright, decisive, confirmed, not cracking, reinforced. Malachar understood what was happening approximately 3 seconds before it was too late to matter. Malachar. No, you cannot. The ritual requires... Istla. The ritual required an undefended convergence point and a supreme LYCAN bloodline that had ended. She looked at him across the battlefield. The silver blazed around her. The ground beneath her feet glowed. Isla, you should have made sure of both. She brought her hand down. When it faded, the Vorkai army stood exactly where they had been, without their commander, without their dark power, without the ancient, terrible intelligence that had been directing them, drawn back, contained, resealed in the warded tomb in the northern reaches by the only force in the hemisphere with the authority and the bloodline to do it. 612 soldiers standing in a field, blinking. The Witch Council's eldest sister would say later, in her report to the Obsidian Court, that what Isla had done was technically impossible, that the resealing of a broken ward of that magnitude required the combined power of the original Supreme LYCAN Council, 7 elders working in concert, in a ritual that had taken weeks to prepare. Isla had done it alone, in under a minute, on a ridge at midnight, while managing a coordinated 6-faction military response. She filed this detail away as useful information for the next time someone questioned her resource allocation decisions. Zane had not left her side once. He had stood at her left shoulder through the entire engagement, not as a figurehead, not passively. He had commanded Silverstone's wolves with sharp, precise instructions through the pack bond, adapting their positions in real time as the battle shifted, feeding Isla tactical updates every few minutes with the focused economy of a man who is very good at his particular job and knows this is not the moment to be anything other than that. They had worked together, she realized, naturally, without friction, without the jostling for authority that happened when 2 strong-willed people occupied the same command space. He had slotted in beside her the way she searched for the metaphor and found it unavoidably, irresistibly, the way a second wolf runs in a mated pair, perfectly matched, perfectly calibrated, each the complement of what the other was. She filed this away too, for later, for the conversation they had promised each other. As the battlefield settled and the Witch Council began the work of processing the leaderless Vorkai soldiers, and Rin's voice rose from the southern position in clear, competent command, Zane turned to her. He was disheveled. His coat was torn at the shoulder where he'd shifted and back again during the engagement. There was ash on his jaw from the ward lines detonating, and his dark hair was pulled loose, and he looked nothing like the polished, controlled alpha commander who had stood in a torchlit courtyard 5 years ago and made a calculation. He looked better, truer, the version of him that existed when the performance fell away. Zane, it's over. Isla, this part is over. Zane, the other part. She looked at him, the blood moon above them, the silver still fading from her skin in slow, diminishing pulses. Isla, yes, the other part. He did not reach for her hand this time. He did something harder. He simply stood in front of her and looked at her, fully, openly, without the guard that power requires, and that both of them had been wearing for so long it had started to feel like skin. Our Zane, I have spent 5 years being the kind of man who could do what I did to you, and I have spent 10 days watching you be the kind of woman you became because of it. Those two things cannot exist in the same understanding without it changing the man." He breathed. She waited. "Zane, I am not asking you to forgive what I did. I'm not sure that's something you owe anyone ever. I am asking, if you are willing, to let me be someone different than the man who stood in that courtyard. Starting now, starting here, whatever form that takes, whatever terms you set, all of it on your terms, Isla, every piece of it." The wind moved across the ridge. Below, Rin's voice carried up, efficient, unflappable, managing the aftermath with the competence of someone who has been managing impossible situations for 5 years and is very good at it. Isla looked at Zane Voss. She looked at him the way she had looked at the Deadlands on the night she had walked into them, clearly, without flinching, seeing exactly what was there, and making a deliberate decision about what to do with it. He was not the man who had rejected her. That man had been operating on assumptions that were wrong, and a pride that had not yet been broken open, and a definition of strength that had no room in it for the thing the moon goddess had tried to give him. This man had stood beside her for 10 days and fought beside her for 1 night and said I was wrong without qualification and held her hand like a question and not a demand. This man she could work with. This man she had if she was honest, and she had promised herself, when she walked back into Silverstone, that she was done with performing versions of herself that left inconvenient parts out. Already decided. Isla, my empire does not fold into your pack. My court, my alliances, my authority. Those remain mine, intact and non-negotiable. I lead the Obsidian Court. You lead Silverstone. Those are 2 separate things and they stay separate. Zane. Understood. Completely. Isla. And if you ever again, in any room, in any company, in any circumstance, make a decision about my worth based on what I am wearing or where I come from or what the room expects of you. Zane. Isla. Isla. I need to say it. Zane. I know. Say it. Isla. Then we are done. Permanently. With no negotiation and no second conversation. He held her gaze. Zane. Then we will never be done. Because that man is gone. You have my word as alpha. You have more than that. You have whatever is left of me after everything I thought I knew turned out to be wrong. Which is, as it happens, quite a lot. Something moved in her face, the controlled authority. Still there, still hers, never going anywhere, but the edges of it. Warm. Opening. The way a hand opens when it decides, finally, to let go of what it has been holding onto and simply receive. She stepped forward. Not to close the distance entirely, not yet, not all at once, because she was the supreme LYCAN Empress, and she had not survived everything she had survived to rush the things that mattered most. But enough. Enough that the space between them was no longer the space of 2 people negotiating, but the space of 2 people who have finished negotiating and are deciding what comes next. Isla. Then we begin. He raised his hand, slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back, and touched her face. His thumb against her cheekbone. Warm. Careful. The touch of a man who knows he is holding something he once threw away and has been given back by grace he didn't deserve and intends, this time, to be worthy of. She let him. She leaned into it, just slightly. Just enough. The bond, not the ghost of it now, not the careful, managed echo she had carried for 5 years, but something fuller. Something that the supreme LYCAN blood and the blood moon and the 10 days and the 10 minutes on this ridge had been quietly rebuilding between them. Sang. Warm. Steady. Ancient. New.